2020, Egypt's economy was booming at an impressive pace. A comprehensive economic reform program, backed by a $12 billion IMF loan, made Egypt an attractive country for foreign direct investment by the end of 2019. Egypt's GDP growth accelerated to 5.6% in 2018-19. Remittances had reached $25.1 billion, and tourism brought in a historically high revenue of $12.6 billion. The current account deficit narrowed from 6.1% of GDP to 3.6%, and foreign reserves peaked at $45.5 billion in February 2020. The Egyptian pound reached 15.56 per US dollar on February 2020, down from 18.1 in June 2017. And inflation fell from a peak of 33% in July 2017 to 5.3% in February 2020. As COVID-19 took over the world in March 2020, a nationwide lockdown and suspension of flights were in place. Unlike previous shocks, the current shock is both external and internal. Globally, the IMF projects global growth to contract by 4.4% in 2020. Egypt's economy came to a standstill, costing it billions of dollars. The pandemic has stressed the long-standing structural vulnerabilities in Egypt's economy. Unemployment increased again to reach 9.6% in June 2020. 2.3 million females left the labor force during that quarter. Egypt's poorest were hit the hardest in the wake of the pandemic, with the high percentage of informal workers with no safety nets. In a study by the National Statistical Agency, CAPMAS, 26.2% of households reported unemployment, and 73.5% reported a decline in income. The Egyptian government, fearing to lose the fruits of a tough 3-year reform journey, quickly acted with a 100 billion Egyptian pounds relief program to confront the resulting economic fallout, backed by an unconditional $2.77 billion IMF loan and other major foreign borrowing. The Central Bank of Egypt also acted quickly, taking other strong measures. While some sectors struggled, others thrived. The measures enacted managed to support the Egyptian economy. Despite economic growth rate declining to 3.6%, Egypt stands as the only MENA country projected to have a positive growth rate this year. The official unemployment rate decreased to 7.3% in September due to the resumption of economic activity with the gradual phase-out of lockdown measures. Egypt's foreign reserves are once again rebounding, reaching $39.2 billion in October 2020, after dropping by $9.5 billion since March. What has Egypt done right, and what could be done better in the era of COVID-19? How will Egypt coexist with the global pandemic this coming year?
Thank you all for watching. I now leave the floor to Dr. Sherif Kamel, the Dean of the AUC School of Business.
Thank you, Ghada, and good afternoon, everyone. Distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of AUC School of Business, it is my sincere pleasure to welcome you all to our third annual Business Forward event. As indicated by Ghada, the theme this year is Enter 2021, Egypt's Coexistence with a Global Pandemic. First, I would like to wish you all and your loved ones to stay safe and in good health. Naturally, we would have wanted to meet like every year in person. However, with the health and safety of everyone as a core priority, we opted to go virtual this year. And hopefully, fingers crossed, this time next year, we'll be over this pandemic and we can all meet face to face. From the outset in 2017, the purpose of Business Forward was to become a portal to transfer knowledge from within the school's ecosystem and into the wider business community. Therefore, given the unprecedented challenges we faced as a society throughout 2020, Business Forward has focused on shedding light on the significant economic developments that took place and continue to evolve given the changing local and global market dynamics, and presenting an expert analysis of the effects of COVID-19, as well as the changes in the business ecosystem, while highlighting innovative ideas and creative solutions for sustainability and inclusive development. Well, in a few days, we will say goodbye to a year marred with challenges, unprecedented times, and abrupt changes affecting millions of lives and livelihoods. Naturally, we are all eager to welcome a different type of year, a different 2021, with hopes that it will bring some normalcy to our lives, preserving our health and safety while offering us the opportunity to run our businesses and go on with our lives. So what does the new year hold for us? For starters, we are closing this year with some good news. The pandemic will hopefully be brought under control if the recently approved vaccines can be produced in the required quantities and are made affordable and universally accessible by everyone. We're looking forward to 2021 as the dust of the pandemic settles. How will the world look like? For now, analysts, economists, and policymakers, regardless of business or industry, predict that the world will be a different place. Value chains will be revisited. Some expect a wave of deglobalization, nothing to do with international collaboration, but a different model of globalization. Business models will see some more innovation, and digital transformation will accelerate more, and we've already seen some of it throughout 2020. The question is, will economies perform, especially how economies will perform, especially in emerging countries? Undoubtedly, there is no one size that fits all. For each country, excuse me, it will decide to how it chooses the path moving forward. However, some issues will get more attention globally, such as environmental, social, and governance issues, with sustainability and climate change at the fore. Some say that mega business transactions are expected to become more of a geopolitical battlefield, and large-scale vaccine distribution will really rely heavily on diplomacy. Well, the prospects ahead promise multiple opportunities for countries that can offer more resilient, diversified economies and sourcing and distribution logistics that are more local and regional. After the turbulent 2020, what will happen in 2021 is anybody's guess. We know that the world post-pandemic will look different, but nobody has a crystal ball to know exactly how different and that really means. For now, it is all predictions and wishes as we reimagine a future moving forward. However, we are delighted today to be joined by someone who, given his extensive experience and knowledge on the local, regional, and global stage, can share his views on what to expect in 2021 and how he sees the changes in the dynamics of different markets and economies. It is my sincere pleasure to welcome our guest speaker for this year's event, Dr. Youssef Ghali. Dr. Youssef needs no introduction. However, I would like just to shed some highlights from his illustrious career. He is currently an economic advisor to several countries in different regions around the world. Early in his career, he joined the International Monetary Fund, working in policy and development review and covering a portfolio of countries in Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. In 1986, he was appointed as economic advisor to Egypt's prime minister and the governor of the central bank, where he had a key role in negotiating the 1987 standby arrangement with the IMF and the 1991 debt rescheduling agreement with the Paris Club. Later in his career, Dr. Youssef held several cabinet offices, including Minister of International Cooperation, Minister of State for Economic Affairs, Minister of Economy, Minister of Foreign Trade, and Minister of Finance. On the global stage, among the several posts he held, he was the chairman of the International Monetary and Financial Committee of the International Monetary Fund. Firm advocate of trade liberalization and global integration, he oversaw the design and implementation of Egypt's economic reform program and played a key role in Egypt's tax reform program, which was one of the most successful reforms and earned Egypt the position of top performer among developing countries in 2007 by the World Bank. He was instrumental in concluding the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership Agreement between Egypt and the European Union, active in advancing negotiation on the free trade agreement between Egypt and the US, and led the negotiations for a free trade agreement with the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, better known as COMESA. He's the author of various publications on the exchange rate, monetary policy, external debt problems and debt relief issues, IMF programs, fiscal discipline, and market reforms. Dr. Ghali received his BA in economics from Cairo University and his PhD also in economics from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dr. Youssef will share his views on the changes in the global economy during the pandemic and its aftermath in terms of trade patterns, international financial markets, challenges, and opportunities for emerging markets. It's also my sincere pleasure to welcome Heba Saleh, the Cairo correspondent of the Financial Times since 2008. She's the moderator of today's event. During the 90s, Heba was the North Africa correspondent of the BBC and reporting for most countries in the Middle East. Her work has appeared in The Economist, The Irish Times, and Middle East International. Heba also sits on Business Forward's editorial board. Thank you very much for joining us today. Dr. Youssef, it's a sincere pleasure. The floor is all yours.
I think, yes. Thank you, Dr. Sherif. Thank you very much. The vagaries of the internet made it that I got disconnected just when you were saying such wonderful things about me. So I will presume we will talk later so you can repeat them to me. It's a boost to the morale.
With pleasure.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It has a special place in my heart when I talk about Egypt and what I talk about the policies that would best suit Egypt. Unfortunately, this is not what I'm going to do today. As you said, I advise a number of countries around the world. And to be able to give advice, you have to have a very intimate knowledge of the data. Now, because of my long involvement in my career with Egypt, I know how the Egyptian economy works intimately. But I need access to a large number of data if I am going to provide any type of useful advice. And therefore, please take what I say as coming from having helped and intimately involved in a number of countries. Obviously, for obvious reasons, I can't mention any names, but where I was privy to very detailed information, which allows me to give you what seems to be a common denominator for all of these countries. I want to thank Heba also for helping me prepare for this and giving me very clear instructions to remain brief so that there is plenty of room for all of you to ask questions and for me to elaborate. Now, let's look at the last 40 years. The last 40 years saw massive changes in the world economy. It saw globalization to come and beginning to wane again. It saw a lot of prosperity in a number of countries, a lot of relocation of industries across the globe. It saw a lot of emerging market economies come forward, massive poverty reduction, but against all of this, there was also massive inequality within countries where the progress of globalization, the benefits of globalization did not touch everybody. There was a group in every society, whether in the US or in Europe or in emerging market economies, that were left behind and were not benefiting from it. Of course, climate change followed all of this, and it's now become major issues. The pandemic came to exacerbate all of this and to put forward all of the problems that were underlying the surface now have come to the fore. And therefore, we need to be sure and realize what exactly are we facing. Internationally, there's a rise in nationalism. The pandemic pushed every country to say, I come first. I don't care about the rest of the world. I come first. It was led by the United States under the Trump administration, well before the pandemic, saying America first, but it was followed by a number of other countries. And the pandemic certified this finally, saying, look, it's us and the hell with the rest. And of course, this changes the way the world and the planet works. Challenges to the Western managed rule-based system. China is coming forward and saying, look, I don't like the way you run things, and I would like to run them differently. China is an emerging power. There is a bipolar world, not the old bipolar world that we used to know between the US and Soviet Union. The Soviet Union never was an economic power. It was an ideological power, was a military power, never an economic power. China is both an ideological power because they have a totalitarian system that they are espoused to and they push, but also an economic power. And that changes the dynamics. Today, emerging markets are competing to stay on the world market because the world market, as you have seen, the IMF has predicted a contraction of 4.4% this year. There is a slight pickup next year, but very uneven in most countries. And therefore, emerging market countries are all competing to stay in the market. You will also have massive indebtedness in countries in the world, from advanced economies where trillions have been spent to emerging market economies where many have spent vast amounts to try and address the fallout of the pandemic. On a national level, you have a massive unemployment wave. People are losing jobs, the massive increase in poverty. People are pushed to use their savings, very often very limited savings, and poverty rates are increasing, not only in emerging market economies, also in developed economies. Here in the UK, I am based in the UK, here in the UK, poverty rates have increased massively. There are queues in front of food banks. The free distribution of food has increased enormously. Now, this is a rich country. Imagine what happens in countries like ours. Of course, there is also parallel to this capital stock destruction. All of these companies, all of these enterprises that are going bankrupt, these are companies and enterprises and a capital stock that is no longer going to be there when the pandemic is past. And therefore, we need to do something, and many countries have taken measures to address this issue so that that capital stock does not disappear. When a company goes bankrupt after the pandemic, it's still bankrupt and it will not come back on stream. And therefore, you have to prevent this and take measures to prevent it. Income inequality, again, massive increases. Some people are benefiting from this, but the vast majority is not. And therefore, the gap between the upper incomes and the lower incomes is going to increase. All of this, and I haven't even mentioned the health requirements and the spending and the challenges on the health sector in all of these countries, be it hospitals, clinics, and now with the vaccine, the distribution of the vaccine. I don't think that the appearance of the vaccine will address in the short term, because we have an issue of distribution. We have an issue of production. When you put all of these vaccines together, the most they can produce is about 2.5 billion doses per year. Now, at the rate of 2 injections per person, that's 500 million. We have 7 billion people. And therefore, there will be inequality as to who gets the vaccine first, both at the international level, developed countries will probably get it first before we and the emerging markets get it. And within countries, probably those who have more resources, have better access, etc., will get it first. And those who have less access will get it last. And typically those with less access are going to be the poor. So you'll have even more inequality, not only in income, but also in healthcare and health facility. The question then arises, what do we do? What can we do? At the personal level, at the individual level, a number of students have come to me and said, look, you're an old geezer and you know what to do in these things. What do we do? Well, my advice is increase your versatility. Make sure you are versatile. Make sure you can do multiple things, because we don't know what the work environment is going to be in the next 10 years. What we do today, and I will come back to this when we go to macro policy, what we do today is going to affect the environment we are living in, working in the next 10 years. And therefore, since we don't know how it's going to look, the best thing you can do is be versatile. Learn many skills, learn digital skills. Because now the issue of telepresence, the fact that you can work from home, like we are doing now, that you can work from home is not going to go away once the pandemic goes away. Some companies have discovered that you work just as well from home as you do from the office. So let us save on renting an office and stay home and come by once a week, twice a week. So a lot of these mechanisms for working are going to change. You want to be able to adapt and adapt quickly. You must increase your resilience. You have to be able to survive a period of unemployment, survive a period where even mental resilience, if you are employed in a job that is not adequate to your skill, that is below your skills, because you're transiting. You have to, because of versatility, you have to learn new skills quickly so as to be able to transit. Don't get stuck running after degrees. Today, the word is not degrees. The word is skills, no matter what the skill is. If we need a plumber, we're not going to look if he has a PhD or a bachelor's degree. If he's a good plumber, he's a good plumber. If I need a hacker, I am going to look for a hacker. I don't care what degree he has. And you will find most hackers, successful hackers, working for cyber institutions and cyber security, etc., don't have degrees. They are people who sat in their basement and learned how to program and suddenly discovered the skill. So you need to make sure you are competitive. You remain competitive in the job market. You remain flexible in the job market. Now, what happens at country level? What do we do? The question arises, there is a destruction. This is unavoidable and it's definite. There is massive destructions in our structures, productive, unemployment, human, everything is being restarted from scratch. The question is, do we rebuild better, different and better? Or do we rebuild as it was? We're going to rebuild. How do we rebuild? If better, then we have to start thinking how. If we're going to rebuild it the way it was before, okay, well, do it before. But most practical economists, meaning economists that have had the responsibility of running a country and institutions, etc., will tell you, never let a good crisis go to waste. Use the crisis to change. Use the crisis to push forward policies that normally you would not be able to accept, or that the public would not accept, because now is the time to change. Now is the time to evolve and to build better. What are the main policy areas? Employment. You have to make sure that we concentrate on productivity. Emerging market economies are going to compete in the world. They're going to lower their currencies. They're going to increase their productivity. They're going to increase their competitiveness. You have to be part of that race. I am helping a number of South American countries, both Central American and South Americans, and the first obsession, the big mantra is productivity. Increase productivity, increase your competitiveness, improve the quality of your product. Second, you have to make sure that you lower the cost of moving from low-skilled jobs to high-skilled jobs. A lot of low-skilled jobs are going to disappear. You saw in the presentation at the beginning, many women lost their jobs. A lot of low-skilled jobs are going to disappear. I will take the example in the city here where most businesses are. Many companies have canceled their rental agreements and will not be coming back. They will work from the suburbs. Now, all of the people who were in charge of cleaning, of providing services in these buildings, of providing food in this area of offices have lost their job. And the jobs are not coming back because nobody is going to be sitting in these offices. So these people, I'm taking an extreme example, they need to upgrade their skills. We as a government need to offer the possibilities of them doing this, need to lower the cost of doing this, and need to make sure that whoever has the skill to upgrade his productivity can do it. We need to salvage the capital stock. All of these companies that are going to go bankrupt need to be helped now and kept from going bankrupt. Because if they do go bankrupt now, they won't be here when we recover. Now, these are the main lines. If I look at the tools we have at hand, macro policy, fiscal policy, monetary policy, and external policy. In a macro policy, I need to create fiscal space. I need to be able to spend money without wrecking the rest of the economy. This is called fiscal space. Indebtedness is not the issue. Domestic indebtedness is not the issue. You can't tell me, please don't use, my house is on fire. You can't tell the fireman, don't use water because it's going to ruin the furniture. So you can't tell me don't borrow because it's going to create burdens in the future. If you don't borrow today to salvage your economy, you won't have an economy in the future. And therefore, use the water today to put the fire. And then if the furniture is destroyed, get some new furniture. And if you know how to concentrate on productivity, you will be able to get it, especially if you're an emerging market economy. The countries I'm helping can grow at 7, 8, 9%. Now, what is relevant in our countries, I say our because I'm Egyptian and I'll never be anything else but Egyptian. Our countries is debt to GDP. Now, if GDP can grow at 10%, you can take care of debt to GDP ratios fairly quickly. So not be afraid to borrow, not be afraid to have a big deficit. Protect the poor, first priority. What destroys a society, what destroys an economy is massive poverty, massive income inequalities, not the income inequalities that come in transitional economies that go from a low growth to high growth. With economies that do that, usually there is an increase in income inequality at the beginning, and then it catches up later on. Not this, but entrenched inequality, which is what the pandemic is doing now. It is destroying the savings of a large section of the population, and therefore these people are going to stay poor. You have to catch them. Second, you have to preserve the capital stock, preserve companies, make them, give them loans, give them grants if you have to, but keep them in the market, keep them alive, because they are the ones who are going to give you the taxes later on that you will use to cover your budget deficit, that you will use to cover your indebtedness. And therefore, have programs that are not afraid to go into grant money, to go into assistance, unconditional and non-debt generating assistance. You have to promote a rich recovery. The advice I gave a number of countries is go hot, get a hot macroeconomic policy, not tentative, I'm afraid of this, I'm afraid, no, push, at the heart. You're in mud, you're in quicksand, and you're sinking. Push hard, and then you'll catch it. Once you get out of this mess, we can catch it. This is the essence of fiscal policy. Monetary policy has to have as primary purpose facilitating lowering the cost of fiscal intervention. In most countries, lowering interest rates. Most have gone to either zero, some negative, European Union, but most are close to zero. Why? Because you need, printing domestic currency is a convention. There's nothing sacred about it. It's a convention. The interest rate doesn't come from God. It's not in any holy book. It's a custom. It's an agreement that we have between the issuer, central bank, and the user, the budget or the public. But it's a convention. So now we need to go past the convention. Now, there are impacts. There are consequences that has to be dealt with, but this is the issue. Also, lower the cost of indebtedness to the economy. A company that is indebted that pays 12, 15% interest is not the same company if it pays 1 or 2% interest. And in that respect, if you lower interest, you lighten the burden on the company and don't help it cross over into viability after the pandemic. Finally, what to do on the external sector, preserve competitiveness. You need to remain competitive. You do this by increasing your productivity, making sure you do the spending that increases the productivity. I'll give you an example. One of the countries decided to concentrate their infrastructure spending on building a road from the southern part of the country to the northern part where the port is. That cut down the travel time from the south where the industry is and the north where the port is from 2-3 days to 7 hours. That's an increase in productivity. Immediately, that gives an opening to many companies to export more cheaply. This is the kind of policy you need to follow. Exchange rate is an obvious tool. You keep your exchange rate on your currency undervalued continuously. And small footnote, the Asian tigers. Remember the Asian tigers of the 90s? Their main policy tool was keeping their currency undervalued. The main criticism to China when it was growing at 9, 10, and 11% per year was that it was keeping its currency undervalued. The yuan was pegged at 12 yuan to the dollar when the real rate, as told by the Europeans, by the Americans, the real rate was 8 yuan to the dollar. They said, why are you keeping it at 12? Well, the Chinese kept saying, well, this is the market, etc. The usual nonsense. But they knew exactly what they were doing. They kept their currency undervalued, especially to become the factory of the world. And they succeeded. And they managed to get over 800 million people out of poverty on the backs of the poverty they created in the developed countries, in the US, in Europe, in other countries that were stuck importing cheap Chinese goods. They lowered poverty levels in China at the expense of poverty levels in the US, South America, North America, etc. I have touched on a few topics. I talk under the supervision of Heba. She will tell me whether I managed it or not, but I'll be happy to answer any question you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Youssef. You've given us a lot to think about here and perhaps also a lot to worry about. So you've painted a picture of a changed world where the rules that we are familiar with will no longer apply. You also spoke of fierce competition between the world's economic powerhouses and the reversal of trends like globalization, which have come with both opportunities and disadvantages for smaller economies. So let me ask you a few questions and then we'll throw it open for discussion. I invite the audience to send questions through the Q&A function of Zoom, but I will ask you 2 or 3 questions to start with. And I wanted to ask you about the impact of the conflict between the US and China. How is that going to shape the economy, the world economy?
Well, that is going to be one of the main elements of the international economic scene in the coming years. The Chinese are not accepting the rule-based system that was established by the West. The Bretton Woods agreements, the IMF, the World Bank, the BIS, the WTO, etc. China doesn't agree with this. China has as an intention to become a main, if not the main player economically and possibly politically. So there will be conflict. They have done a lot, they have made a lot of mistakes in the past in stealing IP, technology, etc., that should have been dealt with. What the US did, maybe not as extreme as the Trump administration did, but what the US did, which is fight back, they should have done multilaterally, not bilaterally, and not using tariffs, using the existing procedures to make sure. But the competition between the US, between China and the rest of the world, it's not going to be China-US, it's going to be China and the West, is going to shape trade flows, because many countries will realize they don't want to be dependent on China for many of their inputs. You see, for example, 5G technology depends on components that come from China. Many countries have cut it off. And they said, no, we will build the industry that is self-sufficient. So there'll be a movement towards self-sufficiency, a movement toward retraction. And the world will sort of break up into 2 camps, Chinese sphere and Western sphere. We, as an emerging market economy, want to make sure we stay in the middle. We can't afford to be on one side to the other because we need both. So it'll be very tricky to remain in the world scene without suffering damage from the fight between the 2 giants.
Thank you. And can I ask you to describe a bit what will happen in our region, the Middle East and North Africa? We have oil importers, oil exporters, the whole oil economy is changing, and some of our countries have relied on globalization to supply markets abroad, auto industry in Morocco, for instance. What's going to happen in our region, and what should policymakers press on this?
Well, there are 2 groups, the oil importers and the oil exporters. The oil exporters are the commodity companies. They're no different from the African economies that are reliant on copper or on bauxite or on one major commodity. These are single commodity economies. These will seek to diversify. They need to diversify desperately. And to do that, they need to spend some of their wealth. Some of their sovereign wealth fund have to be directed towards diversification. They have to direct that towards increasing the productivity of their population. They have resources that can raise the level of education of their population, raise their productivity, and therefore this is where they need to focus. And they will do that. But to do that, they have to establish systems whereby it's not an economy that works budget constraint. If I look at the number of oil producers in the Middle East, for years, for decades, they worked without a budget constraint. Whatever they wanted, they spent. They had money, they had a surplus, and whatever they wanted, they spent. Now, they need to generate resources. They can't continue to do this. They can't continue to rely on oil because oil is going to gradually be declining over time. With all of the agreements for climate control, oil is going to be less important. Unless, and this is where they could invest money, you have new technologies for carbon capture. Technologies that capture the carbon that comes out from using hydrocarbons and helps the rest of the world fight. The oil importers are facing what the rest of the world is facing. A massive crash in employment, a massive crash in their capital stock and in productive capacity, and a competition on the world scene. So one, they need to make sure they preserve the capital stock, like I said. Also, they need to make sure they remain competitive. They remain in the international marketplace because there will be a lot of competition. And the only way for them to maintain production, to maintain employment, is not going to be the domestic market. It's going to be the international market. So you better take the policy that keeps you in the international market.
So when you speak about the policy that keeps you in the international market, because also we need to create jobs, we need to attract FDI. So these policies are going to be very difficult to implement.
They are difficult, yes, they are difficult, and they involve choices. You're going to have to choose. One of the countries that I helped had two choices. They needed to move their currency. Their currency was overvalued. And I told them, look, you're not going to be able to stay in the international market with a currency like this. You need to depreciate your currency. The reason why the currency was overvalued is that they were very attractive to North American carry trade. North Americans are investing in their bills, financial paper, that was giving 7%, 8%, and 9% return, which sort of lowered made their currency appreciate, a bit like what happened in Egypt. So the question was, do you want to keep this, or do you want to stay competitive and create jobs? If you want to create jobs, you're going to have to either do something about the carry trade, do something about the exchange rate, or do something about both. The reason the policy they took was to put a tax on carry trade, saying, if you come in for less than 3 years, you're going to pay me an exit tax of 20%. If you want to come in and stay, immediately the currency started moving up, returning to a proper valuation that was not distorted by the carry trade. Now, obviously, this involved some inflation. Since the market was pretty dead, the inflation was very minimal. But it's a policy choice. Other countries will not do that policy choice or have other priorities. So you need, it's not easy. And you need to know intimately the tools you are using. You can't have a superficial knowledge of how an economy works or what tools you have. I help these countries along with 4 other economists worldwide, all of them trained in top universities in the world. And we often disagree because there are different priorities and different trade-offs. So it's not easy. And you need to know intimately what kind of instruments you're using if you're going to do what you need to do to keep the economy going.
Thank you very much, Dr. Youssef. We've received many questions from the audience, so I'm going to select a few. We've got around 25 minutes. So let me start with a question from Karim Goma. In the existing pandemic, what are your recommendations for boosting entrepreneurship and startups with the challenges of unemployment and self-funding for startups in Egypt?
The transmission broke up a bit. What are the recommendations for what?
Boosting entrepreneurship and startups, given the challenges of employment and funding.
Well, at this stage, I would recommend government intervention. Provide resources to the startups, to the small and micro enterprises, either to survive if they were already established, or to set up shop if they haven't been established. I would immediately come in with grant money or with equity. If we can't afford grant money, we can put equity. I say, okay, I will come in at 20% or 30% of your capital, and I will help you set yourself up, or help them improve their productivity. Startups often require training, require resources, require machinery, etc., computers, things of that nature. I would intervene to help out. This is important because this is going to be the base later on, after the pandemic has been dealt with, the base that is going to offer employment, tax returns, and all of the necessary resources for me to recover from this mess.
Right, and we have another question here from Youssef. How do you see potential risks to your recommended fiscal policy, which is based on high leverage? Could emerging market governments default if global monetary policy shifts away from lower for longer rates, and if the US-China trade war rematerializes as in the first half of 2018?
Yes. Well, the policy choices we have now, it's as Youssef said, it's high leverage. We're borrowing a lot of money domestically, and some are borrowing internationally. We have to keep in mind that developed countries are pouring tons of money in their economies. They are making liquidity extremely cheap, zero interest or negative interest. Sooner or later, in 2-3 years, they're going to have to withdraw this liquidity from the market. And therefore, they will occasion rises in interest rates. So we cannot rely on the fact that international interest rates are going to be very low for very long, for forever. And therefore, we have to take precautions. One, in limiting our borrowing from abroad. Two, in trying to address restructure our foreign indebtedness if it is going to be a problem. And three, for some countries, and I've suggested in another forum that the IMF issue a new issue of SDRs globally, but in some countries, debt forgiveness. Take the example of Zambia. Zambia, there's no way they're going to be able to repay their foreign indebtedness. So this will have to be taken care of, and debt will have to be reduced, canceled. Now, so he's very right in pointing out the fact that the international environment is not going to be the way it is for very long, for much longer, maybe another year, 2 years, and after that, the countries will have to pull back. The war between the US and China was between the US and China and was focused on tariffs, but it's going to expand. And the world has to realize, they are beginning to realize, that the relationship with China will have to be on 3 levels. One, they have to join forces. They have to partner with them on issues that require partnering, like climate control. Two, they have to compete with them on areas where the Chinese and the West are competitors and therefore can compete on a level playing field. And three, they are going to be the enemy in a number of areas where the Chinese do not wish to share their know-how or wish to steal know-how from others or wish to dominate certain areas of technology, of cyber knowledge, etc. There, the Chinese will be the enemy. And therefore, we have to keep in mind that emerging market economies need to position themselves so as to stay away from the conflicting part, the conflict part which harms us. And therefore, it's tricky. You're going to have to follow what happens in the rest of the world on a day-to-day basis to make sure that you stay away from the hot areas and you stay in the areas where you are protected, you are welcomed, you are competing on a level playing field, and you are safe from the clash between the two giants.
Thank you very much. And we have also another question here from Mr. Hamid Hassouna El-Birri. And his question is, measures as well as the initiatives adopted by the Egyptian government and the Central Bank of Egypt were effective, including the declining interest rate trend. What measures and initiatives would you advise for 2021?
That's a very difficult question. Very, very difficult, because for me to be able to give you advice, I know too much and I don't know enough. I know too much about the Egyptian economy, but then which makes me realize that I don't know enough. I cannot give you a recommendation on what should be done in Egypt. I need to know a lot more than what is available publicly, very rightly so. Many data should not be available publicly, but I am sure they are available to the policymaker, and therefore, forgive me, I can't give you any kind of advice without having much more intimate knowledge of the variables at hand in Egypt. But I know that you are in competent hands. So whatever it is they're doing must be what I would do if I was exposed to the same data.
Right. Okay, and we have another question here from Rania Fuad. She would like to know if renewable energy sources already took a huge market share, especially under the umbrella of the SDGs. Will oil and other conventional energy resources disappear gradually?
Well, disappear, no, but they will become more expensive to use. There will be carbon taxes, there will be all sorts of taxes aimed at climate control, at salvaging the climate. So it'll be more and more expensive to use hydrocarbons that generate pollution. On the other hand, a country like Egypt has massive opportunity for renewable energy. We have a sun that doesn't quit. We could provide most of Europe with solar energy. We have wind corridors in Egypt that could produce gigawatts of electricity through wind thing. So we can concentrate in these areas and make it such that we are one of the leaders of the countries that provide renewable energy, clean energy to the rest of the world. One obvious investment sector would be solar energy. Look at the Western Desert. There's hardly a cloud all year round. Why can't we put 100 acres of solar panels and export the energy to Europe? This would be a massive addition. And I am sure that a number of countries that cannot meet their carbon targets would be happy to invest in Egypt so as to compensate not meeting their carbon targets by having their energy supplied by a renewable source. So there are massive possibilities. Hydrocarbons will not disappear. It will take a long time for us to be able to move away from them, but they will become more expensive to use. And therefore, we have to plan in that respect.
Thank you. And another question from Abanoub Rifat. How can we deal with industry level concentration? Many sectors in Egypt have a very high level of concentration and put pressure on market efficiency. How can we provide assistance to SMEs?
This is why years ago, along with other colleagues, we passed the competition law to create an institution that protects competition and that makes sure that there is a level playing field for everybody and that nobody engages in competitive practice. Strengthen that organization, strengthen the people who are in there. They are crucial to the proper functioning of the economy. Get competent people. I remember I spoke months ago to a young man who was at the head of the competition authority, quite knowledgeable, very intelligent, well versed in competitive theory. This is the kind of person you want in there. You want staff like this so as to protect the small enterprises. And there are measures that governments can take to promote small enterprises against the dominance of the large players in the market. But competition is crucial. And the competition authority in any emerging market economy becomes very important if you're going to generate a wide base of employment generation.
Right, and there is another question from Dr. Gamal Heikel, and he's asking if there is a risk if the world is heading towards stagflation, given massive quantitative easing and debt explosion and all the borrowing and indebtedness. Is that going to come back and haunt us?
Stagflation, probably not. Because as soon as there's going to be a hint of inflation, the countries are going to take measures. So, but stagnation, it's possible. It may not be stagnation because there's been such a drop in economic activity that anything will move the needle up. So any movement will look like positive growth. So, but low growth, yes. Tricky monetary policy, yes. How do I reabsorb all of this liquidity without crashing the economy? It's going to be challenging. And we invented new policies to deal with the pandemic. I am sure we're going to invent new policies to deal with the fallout. And therefore, how to resorb the liquidity without crashing the economy, without having interest rates go through the roof, and therefore investment collapsing and the growth collapsing. Right now, nobody is thinking about this because that we know that for the next 2-3 years, we're going to have a problem just generating jobs, generating growth. But everybody has in the back of their mind, I know that my colleagues who are helping other countries have in the back of their mind that someday I'm going to have to withdraw all of this liquidity. How am I going to do it without destroying the place is a question that's there, but for which I am sure today, nobody has any answer.
Right, and I have another question myself. The next year, the next few years are going to be very, very difficult. I mean, you've described the measures, you've described the speed with which governments need to move to help the poor. What is the risk of instability across sort of large swathes of the world? And what can governments do to instill confidence in their population so that they can cross this difficult period?
If you ask me from direct experience with these countries in South America and the Middle America, address poverty. Income inequality is the main poison that can destroy a society and push people to desperation and push them to take measures that they otherwise would not take. The impact on poverty of the pandemic has been massive, massive. Subsidies have been, savings have been destroyed, disappeared completely. And therefore, you're going to have people suffer. Address this. And this is why when I looked at the fiscal policy, I said we need to generate fiscal space, But the first priority has to be protecting the poor, reducing income inequality. Protect the poor first, but also reduce income inequality, because there's nothing that destroys a society as much as the poor seeing themselves suffering while somebody else is sunning himself in luxury and in opulence. So we're not saying don't enjoy your money, but we're saying if he's going to enjoy his money, then I must make sure that those who can't have something to look forward to. Employment is important, but addressing the issue of poverty. Make sure that nobody falls off the safety net.
Economic reform and some of the measures that you're describing often leaves people with a kind of a bitter taste in their mouths, because there is always a feeling that the currency devaluation impacts the poor, subsidy reductions impact the poor, but people don't always see a kind of commensurate increase in taxes on the better off. In this kind of crisis, can taxes increase?
No. Look, it depends. It depends on what the situation in country. There is an African country, which also I'm helping, that had to increase taxes because they had no fiscal space. Any fiscal expansion would cause pressure on the exchange rate. The exchange rate would take off, and the little that the poor had would disappear in inflation. So they had to raise taxes. Now, they tried as much as possible to target taxes to the rich, but this is a poor country. There aren't that many rich to tax. So I can't tell you don't raise taxes. You may have a financial situation that requires you to raise, but I would definitely think not twice, 5 times before I raise taxes today. Because today the market is down, incomes are down, demand is down. If you're going to raise taxes, it will shrink demand even more, which will cause even more unemployment. And therefore, I can't give you, it's like you ask a doctor, should I not take aspirin? Well, it depends what you have. You see, so as a first blush, look at your circumstances and think of taxes as a last resort at present. Later on, maybe, but at present, if you can't help it, well, raise taxes. But if you can, don't do it.
Right. And we have a question here from an anonymous attendee. And he or she is asking, what are the skills to focus on, in your opinion, given the current situation? Because you said people need skills, not necessarily degrees, but skills. Yeah. And I assume you don't want them to become hackers.
Digital, with a capital D. Learn to use machinery, communication, computers, programming. Now, physical presence is at the premium. Most people avoid it, like we are now. It took me 20 minutes to get on the machine here because I'm so incompetent using a computer. My son, who is 18, came tick, 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 tick. In 3 seconds, I was on. So learn this. Now it's too late for me. I'm not sure I would learn, but learn digital communication skills, digital skills, programming, machinery, anything that does away with physical presence. If you can't do anything, learn to drive, because you will be into the delivery sector, that people will, retail trade will change. Nobody will go into a shop. The shop will come to you. And if you can't do anything else, learn to drive a motorcycle, a car, etc. But if I were to advise my children, engineering, all of the digital skills, computer science, these are the things that are required for tomorrow. We don't know the environment we will be facing tomorrow, but we know that if you have digital skills, you're pretty much safe.
Right, and one last question from Nadim Samna, and it concerns, he says, the current crisis demonstrated the weakness of European economies compared to what they used to be. Will this trend continue post-crisis, and will Europe fall irremediably from its position of a leading economy, or will it be able to recover and resurge?
Well, it's funny you should mention this. I was talking to a number of friends of mine who are in policy-making positions, and one of the results of the pandemic is it created a fault line inside the European Union. You recall that the European Union created a budget that is at the level of the Union, not at the level of the countries. They created a fund, 750 billion euros, where the indebtedness comes at the level of the Union, not at the country level. And they couldn't agree how to distribute the money, whether it would be grants to those countries who did not have fiscal space, or whether it should be loans. And that created a fault line between the rich north, which is conservative, wanted each country to deal with its own problems on its own debt, and the south, which is less prosperous, couldn't deal with the pandemic and needed help. They tried to mutualize the problem and they couldn't agree. And that has caused a fault line to appear in Europe. The south part is resentful from the north, that the north, when they were called upon to help, they said, well, we don't really think so. Why don't you go your own way, etc. He said, why the hell are we in a union then? If when a crisis comes, you're not there to help me. So they created that fund, but they still haven't quite agreed on how to spend it. Whether some of it should be grants, some of it should be loans, they haven't quite agreed. So Europe will survive, there's no problem. It is the largest consumer market in the world, apart from China. It is a very large economy, commensurate with the US, commensurate with China. So it's not going to disappear. It may struggle a bit, but the union itself is going to be put under pressure. The functioning of the union, the Brexit is already putting it under pressure, but the fact that not all the countries in the union have been affected the same way by the pandemic. Some have money and some don't. And those who don't couldn't get the money from those who did. So it created a fault line, but I don't think it may sort of slow Europe down a bit, but not in a secular fashion, not permanent.
Thank you very much, Dr. Youssef. Thank you for a very stimulating conversation. I will hand back now to Dr. Sherif Kamel.
Thank you. Thank you, Heba. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heba, very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Youssef. As expected, this has been extremely informative listening to you. It's always a pleasure and a delight to reconnect. You've given us a lot to think about. And I completely agree. Even coming from a technology background, I think acceleration of digitization is going to, in many ways, rule in the years to come. And I've been thinking, it's not the fastest, it's not the biggest, it's not the first to react, but it's those who can adapt to the changes are the ones who will be able to sort of not just survive, but grow and prosper in the years to come. And you've said it in the versatility and the resilience and the agility and the competitiveness of the economy as we move forward. And I think if I just in 10 seconds zoom in the case of Egypt, with massive percentage of the population who are young, I believe this is an asset that can be sort of built upon as we move forward, especially when it comes to the skill set that you alluded to. Once again, thank you so much for your time. It's always good to have you, and look forward to reconnecting again in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sherif. Thanks to all of you for your patience and your welcoming remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.